Chapter 3. Heaven knows I'm miserable now. Sid was already waiting in the booth when I arrived, still wearing his gray vest from work, his tie slightly loosened, tobacco-colored hair soft on his widow's peak. Like the southern gentleman he was, he stood when I came in. "You're shaking," he said, holding my shoulders in a way that made my knees go weak. "Darling, what's wrong?" Darling. Finally, someone who felt sorry for me instead of just for themselves. I didn't get to wallow in public angst, hoping strangers would pat my shoulder or follow me on Twitter. The regret I carried was something deeper, like a bullet lodged in bone. I fell apart in his arms, sobbing in a way that made the other patrons look up from their cheeseburgers and crossword puzzles to stare at me. I didn't care anymore. Jed, easy, sweetheart, easy," he cooed, easing me into the booth. "What happened?" I blubbered everything. Kit Kat and Baldric, the cops and the hipsters on the subway, while I wiped my tears and blew my nose on napkins that disintegrated at my touch. I even told him about getting sick. He held my hands between his, blowing warm breaths onto my frigid fingers until 2 coffees I hadn't heard him order arrived. He shook his head when I took a deep breath and a sip that burned my tongue. "That's awful," he murmured. "Just awful." All I could do was agree. And just as suddenly as it had all come on, I didn't want to talk about it anymore. "Change the subject," I said. "Talk about something else. I'm sick of thinking about it." "Let's order first," he said. "Sounds like you could do with something solid in your stomach." I cringed. Work at Metro Readers had been slow these last few weeks, and my paycheck was about as skinny as a teenage fashion model. A cup of coffee and a Danish at egg school on Sunday was the only splurge I could afford, and having dinner with him today meant that I'd have to come up with an excuse not to go to brunch this week. "Get surf and turf if you want," he said, not looking up at me as he glanced at the menu. "It's my turn to buy, and my rent's already paid." My stomach grumbled. As much as I wanted to take him up on the offer, my body was not equipped to handle that much grease and fat and protein. When the waitress came back, I got a refill on my coffee and ordered a bowl of chicken noodle soup. Sid, tantalized by his own suggestion, got a T-bone. He winked. "Your turn next time." He always said that, but Sid only let me pay if we were going out for something cheap. Hard cider, frites, bubble tea, candy on movie night. He made a lot more than I did, and had quick hands to seize a check. "I don't have a girlfriend," he once told me, "so I might as well spoil you." It wasn't like he didn't have offers. Girls adored Sid. I don't know whether it was his electric white smile, or his bouncy little butt, or his peach pie accent. No matter where we were, I caught them staring, sneaking pictures, and whispering. If he noticed, he never took them up on the implied offers. He hadn't dated anyone since he'd moved here. In the 5 months I'd known Sid, he'd become my favorite person in the whole world. We met at one of Natalie's art parties. His roommate, Terry, had dragged him along by way of introducing him to the neighborhood, and we talked in the corner for most of the night. When everyone else was loud, sloppy, and drunk in that inevitable aftermath of privileged boozing, we had slipped off from the scene like criminals and holed up in a 24-hour diner that closed 2 weeks later. We had pie and coffee at 11:30 at night, and I sopped up every trace of his accent. He had a passion for new wave, unrivaled by any hipster in a Wang Chung t-shirt from Rags A Go-Go, and it was almost hysterical to hear him talk about Devo in a drawl usually reserved for singing off-key to Toby Keith. Like me, he was a transplant trying to make his way among natives, and it bonded us as fast friends. He traveled light, arriving with a tablet and a new phone, a few vests and ties for work, a pair of weekend jeans, and an electric razor. I reintroduced him to the physical pleasures of vinyl one night over Trader Joe's brie and puff pastry, and he began to build his collection of ecstasy and Duran Duran. I let him keep his platters at my place. It assured us at least one date a week, like visitation rights to records I had primary custody of. For the first month we were friends, I hoarded those nights like pirate treasure, living with this constant fear that he would find someone cooler to hang out with. What was a bottle of wine and some old vinyl compared to the city's vast array of nightclubs and wild, willing girls? I had already lost the last guy I loved, catch to such a world, and I kept waiting for it to seduce Sid into its neon arms. But he kept coming by, week after week, with a new record in hand and that same Christmas light smile, and my fears began to subside. "Maybe this'll make you feel better," he said, unwinding his earbuds and handing me the right one. "Temple Tudor, What Are You Doing in Bombay?" I just discovered them, and I'm kind of obsessed with this song. The bass line is almost identical to REM's Can't Get There From Here, but don't let that deter you. He queued up a cheerful post-punk track, just under 3 minutes of solitude, away from the other diners, away from the death I could still feel on my back. I could think of a lot of things I could do in Mumbai now, if I remembered anything from high school geography. Chief among them, not being here in Brooklyn. I handed him back his headphones when our meal arrived, and he had felt a little better with a new tune in my head. So I guess that means you don't want to continue with our scheduled viewing of Homicide, he said. We're about to get to the Vince D'Onofrio subway episode, and it's pretty rough. In addition to 80s music, Sid was obsessed with old cop shows. The Shield is great, don't get me wrong, he told me once, but it completely changed the genre, and now everything's trying to be gritty. You can't just have a detective solving a crime anymore. He has to be a morally ambiguous anti-hero with a violent streak, and it just bores me. Vic Mackey bored me. I was always Team Dutch myself. Maybe not Homicide, I agreed, blowing on a spoonful of soup, too hot to swallow. Is there any Stephen J. Cannell ground we haven't covered? I liked the Rockford Files. He gave it some serious thought and 2 bites of steak before he answered. It's not my man Stephen, but Cagney and Lacey might not be a bad call, he said. Or Chips. There's no problem so terrible that Poncherello can't fix it. As long as it's not Miami Vice and you don't show up wearing an unstructured jacket and sockless loafers, I joked, my sense of humor coming back with my appetite. What about this weekend? He rolled his eyes. This weekend's no good, he groaned. I told Terry I'd go out with him. He's been bugging me for weeks, saying he's got the perfect place to take a southern gentleman like me. It will probably be boring and possibly suicidal. But, given what his idea of southern is, but the only way to get him to stop bugging me to go out with him is to actually go out with him. I figured this should buy me at least a month of ignoring him. What, like duck hunting? Cooking meth? I joked. I did pretty well in chemistry. Could I come along too? Heaven knows I could use the cash. Darling, I could not live with myself if I forced you to spend an evening with him, especially after all you've been through. He reached across the table for my hand and kissed it. But I'll probably be texting you through the whole ordeal, so it will be like you're right there with me. I got a giddy feeling in my stomach that was normally reserved for waking up from a dream about Stephen Colbert. And when you do come over, you can cook me a delicious barbecued squirrel, I said, trying to mask my sudden bliss. Sid took a bite of his T-bone and chewed for a moment. I'm pretty sure that's what this steak is, he said. For one perfect moment, I forgot about Kit Kat. For a moment, everything was normal again, just dinner with my best friend, talking about music, mocking his idiot roommate. I thought about suggesting we slumber party in a motel for the night, watching pay-per-view with bags of microwave popcorn and mini-bar booze, but I didn't have the money for dinner, let alone a night in a Manhattan high-rise. We finished our dinners. Sid dropped me off at my subway station with a long hug and a kiss on the cheek, and left me nowhere to go but home to my crime scene.